Hello everyone. We are starting with the session as time is over to wait for the participants. Before starting, please let me know if I'm audible to you and my screen is visible. Hello, am I audible to you? Yeah, thank you, Ramesh. Firstly, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Saili Dave and I'll be the host for today's webinar. And I'm glad to welcome you all in this webinar, MS-4017 Manage and Extend Microsoft 365 Copilot. Now I'd like to introduce you to us, Synergetics. So, Synergetics is a leading training company that helps professionals and business to stay ahead in technology. Synergetics specialize in teaching Microsoft 365, Copilot, AI, and cloud computing through expert-led courses, hands-on workshops, and certification programs. Synergetics' goal is to make learning practical and impactful, equipping individuals with the skills they need to succeed in fast-changing digital world. These are some expert synergetics learning solutions. So this is the persona-based onboarding, onboarding add-on, certification add-on, rescaling, emerging technology training, certification hackathon, cloud adoption, latest technology training, sales, pre-sales training, practice playbook, and architecting. This session is organized by ATC community, that is Azure Tech community, and sponsored by Synergetics on behalf of Microsoft. Well, uh, ETC community is open to all who are eager and interested to learn and explore emerging technology. What you have to do, you just need to follow our groups on Meetup. For that, I'll share all our community links in the
Sorry, Sally, if you're speaking something, you're on mute. Hello, Sally. Sorry, guys. Seems to be some challenge at her end. So, guys, Sally has shared all the information on the chat. So, Prakash, am I audible to you? Darshan, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So, what she's sharing right now is in terms of the curriculum for the session, MS 4017. Thanks, Shubham. Let me get started. Thanks a lot, Sally. Let her complete with her presentation. Then I'll go ahead. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the session on time. Really appreciate your patience and support and your enthusiasm in learning new technologies. Guys, once it comes to Microsoft, there has been recent releases in terms of Copilot offerings, Copilot for Microsoft 365, Copilot for Office applications, Copilot for security, Copilot for Power Platform, and at every places you'll see introduction of Copilot, which is a very critical, crucial generative AI based tool, adding more and more features and making the entire environment more usable, more applicable to day in, day out usage. People from different type of backgrounds, whether they are technical people, non-technical people, people who are just getting onto a technology, want to learn maximum out of those things, they can start leveraging on each of these members. That's the key idea behind Copilot. As part of this session, within MS-4017, Microsoft is focusing on various aspects from management and extensibility of Copilot for Microsoft 365. What are the key features over here? And how one can start understanding and evaluating their current platform, understanding the licenses that we have for Copilot, how do we assign it to people, how do we manage the content sources that we have within our environment, and then look at the perspective from extension point of view. That's the core focus of MS 4017. My name is Om Prakash Pandey. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I carry experience of around 25 years in this industry. I have trained more than 5 lakhs plus developers, trainers, architects, learners across the globe. My continuous endeavor is to help people understand and implement technology. I'm part of Synergetics IT Services Private Limited. And like Sally mentioned earlier, the core mission that we are working on is getting more and more people aligned to technology, helping them to use these technology solutions to solve their day in, day out challenges on their professional front, on their business front, and people who want to build careers on IT forums. Before I go ahead, can I see a thumbs up? People who have already worked with Copilot. Shubham, Venugopal. Can I see thumbs up? People who have already worked with Copilot, have a prior experience on that. You could see two of them. Okay. There are quite a few. Yeah, I can see Raj as well. That's good to see. There are quite a few who are new to Copilot. Not sorry, guys. So Microsoft is receiving the feedback and they are adding that feedback to enhance experience of various people interacting with the environment and helping them to get better and better experience. Now, if you look at the audience profile over here, it is designed for Microsoft 365 administrators. Now, once it comes to this administration, the most important aspect is to look at the core members which are part of your environment. how many users we have, how do we group those users, how do we assign them the relevant permissions, give appropriate permissions to those users. If you see the course over here, or I would say the base knowledge which should be there is Microsoft 365 Administrator MS-102. What I'm assuming right now is people who have joined, they have knowledge on Microsoft 365 services. You all have already been working with some of the base technologies like PowerShell or Microsoft 365 Copilot, some knowledge on that based on the response which I saw. Apart from two or three people, others don't have too much of experience on Microsoft 365 Copilot, not an issue. I will discuss about those areas as well. But the major aspect over here would be in terms of administration. If you look at the learning path, there are three core modules over here. Let me share the course agenda given by Microsoft, where you also have lot of learning resources. Thanks a lot, Raj. Thanks, Venugopal. I think Krishna has already put this link on the chat. There's one more information that you all can take a look at. That is your GitHub implementation. Work smarter with AI. So people who already are MCTs, they can take a look on this. If you look at the key members over here, as part of your first learning path, it is implementation of Copilot for Microsoft 365. The next module that you'll see is from perspective of data security and compliance. If you look at the first learning path, we need to understand what is the significance of data security and compliance here. So I'll get into deep dive of those areas. As part of learning path 2, here we are discussing about the zero trust model, management of Microsoft Copilot licenses. And if you look at learning path 3, here the focus is on Copilot extensibility development path. I've already shared the learn modules, so you all can go through those in detail. From my perspective, what I would want to do is, in the given timelines that we have, 3 hours, 3.5 hours, I would want to go deeper and share my experience from each of these elements, how Microsoft is adding newer and better technologies to simplify the administration of the underlying environment. As far as the simulated exercise is concerned, they have added some of the administrative aspects. So during the learn modules, you all can see all the discussions around the same. Let me start with the first module. Now, if you look at, I'm not sure how many of you have got access to the slides. It's very verbose in nature. I will not read every point over here because I don't have that time. What I would want to do is, I would want to focus on what is the crux of this entire environment and what would be the impact of Copilot in on the entire organization. And as an administrator, how is it impacting our day-to-day life? I'll be focusing on that member. So step number one, if you see, or I would say these learning paths are more in terms of steps in ensuring a smooth adoption of Copilot. Just give me a moment. So actually, this is the kind of naming convention that Microsoft is trying to replicate across all its Copilot solution. That is Microsoft Copilot for which resource you want to use. Here we are looking at the administrator or administration or administrator's perspective and how they are going to use Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365. Now, first thing to understand is why is a need for planning over here? What is the need of distribution over here? And this is the question that one should understand and answer. So, from an administrator's perspective, we are first need to focus on various Copilot licenses. We know the usability of Copilot. We have seen a lot of videos. Some of us may have first-hand experience, right? But once it comes to the cost involved over here, there is high cost for each of the licenses which are being assigned. Now, the challenge over here is keeping this high cost in mind. How do we ensure that its usability is maximum? What is its impact or applicability for an individual to which this license is being assigned? How do we manage that? That's why we have to do planning over here. Before this, if you see the step number one, even before we give those licenses, prepare your organization for Microsoft 365 Copilot. So how do you do that? And what would be the steps involved? The first aspect over here is procuring those licenses and ensuring all the prerequisites is being taken care. So if you look at the first line itself, I already mentioned about this. What is the significance of Copilot? So usage of generative AI, providing real-time intelligence. If you see the core modules over here, this is entire breakup of 4017. What is the prerequisite for Microsoft 365 Copilot? Checking for your data stores. If you see this data, where is this data coming from? Maximum amount of data when if you are using Word online, Excel online, PowerPoint online, right? All this data is being stored within your SharePoint environment. Even if you look at your OneDrive also is an extension of SharePoint environment. Along with this SharePoint, the second major place where the data is being saved would be if you look at your data sources. The first data source would be your SharePoint environment, SharePoint libraries. Second member over here would be your Exchange Online, your respective mailboxes that we have. If you want to consider OneDrive over here, that's not a problem. Another resource is your Teams environment, Teams channels, the conversations that we are doing. So whenever we are talking about generative AI or whenever we are talking about Copilot, we'll have to ensure that all these data sources are being protected. Now, protected from what? They should be protected from any leakage of data, any leakage of sensitive information to the outside world. That is what we have to be careful about. So how to do that? What are the set of security tools which are available here, which will help us achieve that? Another important aspect that one should understand over here is data security. right? Data security and compliance. As far as data security and compliance is concerned, this is one of the important aspects where you have to focus on authentication, we have to focus on authorization, right? And if you look at these members over here, we need to focus on role-based access control. Depending upon who has logged in or whoever is performing that search. So when you say a Copilot agent, most of our communication is happening using agents, using searches over here. So what is the permissions being given for that user on the underlying data? How do we protect those resources? That is something which is very, very important. There could be plenty of people who have joined this session or who are planning to go for Copilot. Their first understanding is Copilot will help me get access to data which was hidden or which was only accessible to top management, mid management, right? From a workforce environment, we are not getting access to that data. With Copilot, we will start getting that. That would be a wrong notion because you will not be able, and as a Copilot implementation team, we have to ensure that data sensitivity is being maintained. Now, once that aspect is being taken care, then we can go to the next set of steps, that is assigning Copilot licenses. Like, and this is what I mentioned earlier. So based on the cost being mapped, how we can assign these licenses to respective users. Now, once we have assigned these licenses, they are able to search the information, they are able to collate the information. The challenge would be there are so many Copilot options behind the scene, right? So say, for example, I'm using Copilot within my SharePoint environment or within my Power Platform environment. I would want to connect to other services. Just give me a moment. So here, let's go to portal.office.com. Now, within your Microsoft 365 environment, there are large number of pre-existing services that we have. And with each service, we have a Copilot associated, right? So rather than jumping around, going from one application to second application, what I would want to do is I would want to have all these Copilots or all these applications interacting behind the scene, and they should be able to execute these things in a given flow. Even if there are some third party knowledge sources, I would want to associate that with my new environment. Just give it a moment. There are more than 26 plus applications that we have within our current environment. And I want to make sure that using a Copilot, it is helping me to connect to all these data sources in a secured manner and helping us to share information with my other team members. Right? So that's what I'm looking for. And this is your point number 6, that is extending Microsoft 365 Copilot with other services. So instead of having data which is coming from SharePoint libraries, Exchange Online, OneDrive, Teams channel. How about getting data from Dataverse? How about getting data from Azure SQL options? How about getting data from third party RESTful services? Because this is very relevant information where I'm looking from an extensibility perspective, right? So I want to go beyond Microsoft 365. That's where extensibility will come into picture. The last option or the last option that we will see is drive Microsoft 365 adoption throughout the organization. So giving the license is not a big deal. That's a first step to do. That's a first step and starting point that we have. If we look at M365 license cost, and if you look at M365 Copilot license cost, I don't have to tell you all why is there so much of pressure on ensuring right people get this license, and after the license is given, they are actually using this license. It is $30 per user per month. And if you take a cost price of 85 rupees per dollar, how much is that? 85 into 30, right? So that will be the cost per user per month. And that's why there are so many sessions which are happening from Microsoft, from the partner ecosystem that we have. So Synergetics is a Microsoft learning partner from last 30 odd years, right? We have been consistently working and taking all the new releases and products from Microsoft to the market with the same type of intensity, with the same kind of focus that Microsoft wants to instill in their team members, and giving right set of information to people so that they can take relevant decisions. If you look at the prerequisites over here, the first aspect over here or first prerequisite to be understood is, have we taken up Microsoft 365 right set of licenses, and we have started the implementation of those guys. I think I'm audible to you all now. Am I clearly audible to you all? Okay, thanks, Darshan. So, Venu, Venu Gopal. So once it comes to your Copilot Studio, from Copilot Studio, we can add all the respective knowledge sources that you'd want. I'll come to it towards the end, and I will discuss about the Copilot Studio. If you want to try out, you can check copilotstudio.microsoft.com. Copilot Studio is the key member, how one can go ahead and create their initial copilots, train them, because this is all based on a AI based model, machine learning model. So we'll have to specify relevant knowledge sources, and using those knowledge sources, right? Copilotstudio.microsoft.com. We'll be able to see all the previous bots and the new bots that one would want to create. And with each bot, what is the knowledge source that we would want to add from third-party websites, from RESTful services, your existing data sources, what actions you'd want to perform, all that is part of your Copilot Studio. Right? So if you see these options, there are some of the pre-existing members. We can also create our own custom resources over here or custom members over here. Okay, let me quickly run through these prerequisites, and these are very, very important. So first thing is we should have a right license for Microsoft 365. My recommendation over here is you all should have first of all explored all the applications. There are plenty of them, and believe me, not all of them are paid in sense they will be part of your standard license. So things like Power Platform and other members, they would require a separate license, correct? But there are plenty of other members which are part of the standard license, but most of us may not have explored it. So first thing which I will recommend is explore those options, explore those service applications which are there, and do understand what is the sense that it makes, which type of business use cases we can perform through those services. That should be the first step. Second member over here would be ensuring all have Entra account. This, what is this Entra all about? Just give me 1 second. Earlier, people have been using Azure Active Directory. It was an older name. The new name given is Microsoft Entra ID. And this Microsoft Entra ID is a centralized authentication source for your entire Microsoft 365 suite of products. It is an authentication source for Power Platform. This is an authentication source for all other Microsoft services or third-party services that we have. If you look at Microsoft Azure, right, third-party applications, so all of them would have their authentication, authorization, identity management happening through Entra ID. So once you have your users created here, we'll have our tenant being created. We'll have all our users and groups over here, right? So to those users and groups, what licenses we would want to associate, right? What permissions we want to give on the underlying platform data sources, that is what we can govern over here. So from security point of view, this is our centralized source for accessing and managing the users within that organization. Consider provisioning 1 TB OneDrive. This I don't have to go into more details. Depending upon what type of license you all have gone for in Microsoft 365, this is by default available. Install your client applications, right? Now, in our case, what is happening is once it comes to Microsoft 365, once it comes to Microsoft 365, we are only aware about the desktop apps or the client apps which are being installed over here. There are a lot of other services that is there on Microsoft 365 environment, which we may not be aware about. And that's what I was mentioning. So take a look at all those services. Once it comes to your Copilot, Copilot will have impact on both the members. So one is your Copilot on the apps, which are the desktop apps over here. And along with this, you'll have your Copilot being mapped here as well on the online environment. Right? So you'll have your Copilot extensions. We need to get both of these things in place. Ensure all users have Microsoft 365 license rather than legacy on-premises license. Now, please be careful of this. When I say legacy on-premises, here what we are talking about is our local environment. Within our local on-premises environment, earlier we may have set up a Active Directory. Okay, let me use one of the icons here. So we'll have our Active Directory domain services being configured, and this domain services we would have already used as a synchronization source to our Entra ID, right? So we would have already done these kind of implementation, done these kind of synchronization using Entra ID Connect as a tool. So once you have synchronized these users, that's one part of it. We need to assign licenses to Copilot licenses to those users, and then they will be able to see those features or see those resources within Microsoft 365. Okay. So our current focus right now is Microsoft 365 environment. This is the set of prerequisites which is required. As far as best practices are concerned, I'll skip this for now. I already spoke about role-based access control, having just enough access. I already mentioned about integration with Azure ecosystem. So once it comes to your Copilot resources, the first thing to start with over here is granting appropriate access to people on the underlying data source. If people don't have access to the data source, whether it is SharePoint environment, OneDrive, Exchange mailboxes, right? They will not be able to get enough amount of information, even if the given search strings are correct or the prompts that they have mentioned are correct.
Copilot for Microsoft 365 is here. And today I'm going to walk through the 3 quickest steps to get everything up and running the way you want with your organization's data. First, by quickly optimizing search so that Copilot for Microsoft 365 only retrieves the data that you don't mind all users seeing. Second, by updating your apps in both desktop and mobile devices so they can get the latest Copilot experiences. And third, by granting access at scale to the right people in your organization. Once you've taken these steps, the advantage of Copilot for Microsoft 365 is that it has protections uniquely built in to respect the security and compliance policies you have in place for your data in Microsoft 365. Additionally, to manage your rollout, we give you full visibility to track deployment readiness, as well as the apps in use with Copilot. And you can also get deep insights on how people across your organization may be benefiting from their Copilot for Microsoft 365.
So if you see this video, right? Right now I don't have time on hand. I can share this link with you all. Y'all can go through this video, and they have already mentioned about some of the key steps. Now, one thing that they have mentioned as part of the discussion is they have mentioned about usage of Microsoft Intune. As far as Intune is concerned, this will help us in terms of pushing any kind of policies that one would want on multiple devices. Even if we are looking at enabling these enabling Copilot on the client environment, even that has to be part of your Intune policies. So we can push these applications to all the machines, desktops, laptops, tabs, mobiles using Microsoft Intune. Let's proceed ahead. So first thing to do over here is like I said, maximum amount of data sources that we have, that would be part of our SharePoint environment, right? And once it comes to your SharePoint resource, here Microsoft has released something called as SharePoint Advanced Management. And what this does is it helps you to verify all the sources that you have, the data sources within your SharePoint resources. And using this advanced management tools, it can help us scan the entire environment and see if there are any kind of leakages or any kind of public access being given to any of the underlying sites. So if you have your environment ready, so here we can look at your domain name dot sharepoint.com. As part of our SharePoint environment, here we'll be able to see what are the pre-existing content sources that you have. So if you look at documents, this is one of the libraries over here. So there could be multiple such libraries. If you don't have an existing library, we can create a new library over here to store all these information at one place. Now, whenever we are looking at Teams, whenever we are looking at all the information within the Teams, it is actually a SharePoint library behind the scene where all that uploaded documents are being stored. Okay, you have your SharePoint sites with respective libraries, with respective lists that we have, which is holding all the information that one would want to create. So apart from the UI aspect of it, SharePoint Online would have all the contents. So documents, form templates, style libraries, site pages, right? So these are set of pre-existing information that we have. What permissions we want to give to each of these users can be done through your site settings, users and permissions. So when we are talking about SharePoint advanced management tools, it is actually going to all these sites, subsites, and the hierarchy which is being created, checking for the permissions. Now, what is the core purpose of the tool? So first is managing the content sprawl. Today, what is happening is every meeting that we go, we have a new team site getting created, right? And as far as these team sites are concerned, like I said, these team sites will create a new SharePoint site behind the scene. Using this advanced management tool, it will check for if there's not too much of ever increasing digital content, which of this information is repeated, which of these information is duplicate, and how do we contain or control that site. Along with this, if we need to create any kind of policies to delete those members, delete those unwanted sites from here, we can do that. Prevent any kind of oversharing. So when you go to your SharePoint site, or if I go to a document library, here if you see on extreme right hand side, there's options for sharing this site, sharing this information to not just internal team members, but also to external team members. So here we have an option of site visitors. At times, what happens is based on our requirement, we may have shared some of these links to our partners, to our third party members, guest users. When we are going for Copilot, right, some of this information will be available to them. And this is something which I may not want for my current environment. So when we are creating any of these agents, here what we are doing is we are adding set of knowledge sources, right? So when we add these knowledge sources, when we add these knowledge sources, it will automatically pick that information, pick that data from SharePoint site, respective mapped website that we have, mailboxes that we have. And all this will be part of your Copilot Studio. It's taking some time. So if you go to the knowledge sources, I have already added some of the links over here. I was doing one of my sessions for Bajaj Alliance. So like you can see, I have added set of knowledge sources. If there are some of the pre-existing FAQs, right? We can upload those FAQs files over here. What it will do is when I ask these questions, it will automatically check for the contents being mentioned over here as part of my knowledge sources. So your SharePoint resource would also be one of the knowledge source over here, provided it is uh, accessible, right? It is accessible to the user who is trying to run this agent. So we have to check for con content oversharing. Now, once it comes to your content lifecycle management, this is what I was talking about. So there could be appropriate SharePoint administration policies that one can create that after uh, 2 years or 1 year, whatever might be the timelines, once the project is being completed, right? All that information should be deleted or it should be removed or archived so that it does not become part of the day-to-day searches because some of these information may not be relevant for people. Along with Copilot, if you look at it as a role of an administrator, right? Apart from assigning those licenses, making people access that data, applying various policies in terms of data loss prevention policies. So here you'll have your compliance, audit expectations being met, checking for data loss prevention. These would be some of the key things to be verified. Along with this, today you'll see there is a lot of stress which is being focused on Synapse, Azure Data Factory, and lot of data cleansing tools. The core purpose is when it comes to your Copilot, we need to focus on data quality, because whenever there are search results which are coming out, those search results is not coming through the generative AI. It is based on the data which is there behind the scene, and that data is being used to train the model. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to check for data governance best practices. So checking for restricted data is one aspect, then checking for data steward rules. We have to train employees to make sure that whenever they are inserting or adding any new information, any new document is being uploaded, they have to go through the entire content to make sure. Just I gave an example of Bajaj Alliance, right? So they have to make sure none of the customer information is available outside. When I say customer information, it should be available only to that customer. It should not be accessible to any other person. What is the premium amount? What is the premium duration for that particular customer, right? Generic information, no problem. But specific information will have to be very, very careful. So if any of these access authorization has been done, there has to be appropriate process for that. This is what is one of the most important aspects that one is to focus primarily when it comes to your data governance rules. I'm not sure how many of you have worked with this recently. Microsoft has come up with a new tool called as Microsoft Purview. It has been there for some time, and there is a complete certification which is mapped towards it. So if you look at your Microsoft Purview as a resource, it has multiple components in terms of data governance. It has components on data security, data compliance, right? And there is a dedicated portal that we have for Microsoft Purview. We can go to purview.microsoft.com. If you all remember, earlier resources that we had, it was security.microsoft.com and compliance.microsoft.com. From data governance and compliance perspective, Microsoft has come up with a new portal which is called as purview.microsoft.com. If you see the members or solutions available here, checking for audit, communication compliance, data catalog, data lifecycle management, information barrier, information protection, insider risk management. All these things are a part of a single portal. So we can create these resources by using our Azure portal, Azure environment. We can create these resources within your Microsoft 365 environment also. So right now, whatever I am showcasing here, this is data governance and data compliance portal within Microsoft 365 environment. Risk and compliance, data security, data governance. So all these categories we can see over here. Coming back to the context, once it comes to your administration of these resources, we need to ensure the backend components are being taken care. The backend data which is there, that is being mapped. One more aspect of purview is checking for sensitivity labels. So how do you know which data is sensitive? How do we know which data is not sensitive? Right? So once it comes to labeling of data, classification of data, that will play a very vital role. The challenge over here is, how do I know if a data is sensitive? Right? So it could be done in a manual fashion. So go to every document, open that document, read the information, right? And see if it has any credit card information, any personal information of a individual, right? That would be one approach. Second approach is, whenever you have large number of documents, we can automate this process. So for data classification, once it comes to our solutions over here, right? So if you see, there is something called as sensitive information types. And using these sensitive information types, we can associate multiple data sources over here, which is your SharePoint sites, OneDrive, share, your Teams channels, right? Wherever there are data members being stored, I would want to perform this scan, and I want to check all that information. Wherever I find that information being stored, I would want to mark that document as sensitive. Taking some time. There are more than 250 plus pre-existing sensitive information types which are available. And if you want to go beyond that, say whatever is my organization need is not coming up over here, we can go and create a custom sensitive information type, custom SIT. We can use regular expressions. I don't know why this is taking time. Maybe the list which is being shown, that is taking time. We can also create something called as EDM. EDM is a exact data match. So yeah, now this is here. These are the list of sensitive information types. Before going for Copilot, as an administrator, we'll have to make sure that all the information which is sensitive in terms of the organization from the customer's point of view, compliance perspective, and the reason why we are doing this is Copilot could be dangerous if not being implemented in a right manner. So all these background work in terms of protecting the data, verifying the data, all these things needs to be done earlier. After ensuring that all this data is being protected, then we can go ahead and make it available to the Copilot. Otherwise, your Copilot will be only replacement for your website, which is not the actual purpose of Copilot. Getting it? So what Microsoft is trying to say, not directly, but indirectly, is don't be in a hurry to implement Copilot. Make sure your backend administrative tasks are being done correctly. Right? So just these 2 points which I wanted to mention about from the perspective of data governance, data compliance. Right now, what I have been doing is I have been helping number of organizations like HCL, TCS, Accenture in how do you implement the data compliance using Microsoft Purview. Another important member is your Entra environment. I'm sure everybody has been through entra.microsoft.com. This is a complete dedicated portal from perspective of identity management, from perspective of conditional access policy, Microsoft Priva. So each and every service by Microsoft, now you will be able to see a separate dedicated portal for it. So from an administrator's point of view, it is essential for us to understand these members. How do they work? What components will help us in successful administration of our background components? You can see your identity creation, users, groups, devices, applications, and at the same time, checking for identity governance, hybrid management, creation of conditional access policies, multi-factor authentication. So along with your licenses, when it comes to implementation of conditional policies or privileged identity management, we will need a P2 license for Entra ID. Let's take up the next video here. Don't worry, I'll share all these links with you all after
How
the
is your data
session.
protected when using Microsoft Copilot? And how do you get ready for it? Well, in the next few minutes with Copilot for Microsoft 365, now more broadly available to organizations of all sizes, I'll unpack how you can securely take advantage of generative AI across Microsoft 365 app experiences. And I'll also go through the steps and resources to deploy it at scale. Now, if you're new to Copilot for Microsoft 365, it lets you use natural language prompts to interact with your organization's data and generate personalized content and responses with relevant insights that are unique to your work context. While you only see the generated response in your original prompt, behind the scenes, Copilot for Microsoft 365 interprets your request and, if necessary, will find information you have access to within your organization from your work files sitting in SharePoint and OneDrive, as well as email and calendar via the Microsoft.
So I hope this helps you understand why to protect information in SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Dataverse, because wherever you have access to, it will pick up information from all those places. So even before we allow Copilot to work, we'll have to make sure all the sensitive information is protected so that in your search results, you should not get the user should not get any information that is sensitive, right? And the person does not have access to it, right? So those things have to be taken care.
Graph, and it presents this information as additional context along with your original prompt to the large language model to generate a personalized and informed response. And even though none of this information is retained by the large language model.
So one thing that most of them have a question about is, as far as these LLMs are concerned, what if my organization information is accessed through do these LLMs and it is being shared outside the environment? That is, that should never be a challenge, or I would say Microsoft promises that it would never be a challenge, because these LLMs, which is given by Microsoft, they are only to assist the content generation. It is the customer's content or the enterprise information within for an organization, within an organization, it is not being used outside. So in terms of safe and secured mechanism of implementation, Microsoft has already provided this as part of their guidelines. I'm running short on time, but once it comes to assigning these, once we have protected all these members, right? Once we have ensured all the data is being cleansed, all the resources are mapped correctly using Microsoft Purview, we have verified for data quality, right? We have checked for the data quality score by using our Purview portal. Then we can go ahead with assigning Copilot licenses. If you see the steps involved within Copilot licenses, we are assigning it to a specific group, we are assigning it to a specific individual, assigning it to a particular team. There could be different strategies over here where we can look at individuals or team members who are external facing, which means talking to the customer on day-to-day basis. Our target might be to enhance the user experience with our organization, right? That could be the purpose of using it. Our endeavor over here could be to ensure that our internal processes, HR process or your internal team dynamics, that is being enhanced. So what is the purpose of adopting Copilot? So based on that, we can assign licenses to our specific team members. If you see the other licenses along with it, like I said, there should be a Entra ID P2 license. Along with this, we can tag it with the Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 license, Microsoft 365 Business Standard, Business Premium. Now, these are the options available, right? It is not a compulsion that everybody should have the same license. If you see the, like we saw in the video, if you look at the backend, how these members are being implemented. So through your Microsoft Orchestrator, we'll check for data governance across multiple data sources, right? I showed you all in terms of knowledge sources. It could be your Microsoft Graph, Dataverse, your web resources. From internal information that we have, Outlook, Excel, Word, like Loop, your PowerPoint environment, OneNote, where do you have all the of organizational information being stored? We can pick data from there. If you look at the underlying foundational model for generative AI, it is using GPT-4o and other latest versions of ChatGPT to use the LLM resources, large language models, and collate all this information from your environment, working with the data sources that we have, and generate a final usable content, right? So that's the core purpose of Microsoft 365 Copilot. What I showed you all earlier was from perspective of Copilot Studio. Now within this Copilot Studio, we already have set of pre-existing models. So if you see the examples which we had examples that we had seen earlier, they are coming from the foundational model. Along with this, what we can do is we can add our other data sources or knowledge sources that we would want. Now, one thing which I was not able to showcase, now I can go to the other members. So here, you'll be able to see the key member, what is the resource that you want to map. One of the key, another members over here is the knowledge source that is being mapped. We can add specific topics. So if you see this, your greetings, basic elements are being associated over here. So we can add our own topics to this. What action do you want to perform? You want to, so through this agent, once the appropriate prompt is being given, I want to perform actions on Excel online, invoke some of the basic services in the background, right? Now, these services could be running on your Azure environment. It could be running on a third-party environment, initiating a Power Automate flow, performing a lot of actions through that, running Power Automate for desktop, right? Performing actions within our on-premises environment. So I want to send or invoke some application from my local machine. Those things can be done. Checking for Dynamics 365 knowledge article. So if there is any customer information available there, which is required for me, right, for performing my day in day out tasks and activities, I can invoke that as well, right? So these are some of the pre-existing actions that one can perform. Now one would say, oh Prakash, there are plenty of other things which I want to do, which I don't see here. Okay, go ahead, create a custom connector and connect to your Azure based services, connect to your third party applications. You want to create a new prompt for managing this, we can do that as well. If you have, if you want to do an extension from Azure bot framework, right? We have an open AI available on Azure platform. You want to connect to that, we can do that as well. So these are the options for extensibility once it comes to your pre-existing environment. Okay, so these are the earlier activities which I had mapped. And once our bot is ready, where do you want to publish it, or how do you want to make your people access this information? Now, using this orchestrator, what I showed you all right now, the Copilot Studio, it will help you to work with all these members at a single place, which makes it easier for us to build and create new resources, work with our existing members, whatever data stores that we have, how do we interact with those members? From now, this is all happening in the background. From users' perspective, they still have to go and write their prompts and invoke the members in the background. Now, once it comes to these chatbots or agents, that would be a right word into context. These agents, they can communicate or interact with other agents as well, where other agents would be running in the background, taking that as an input and giving back the relevant output. So we can have a complete army of AI agents, AI enabled agents, which can help us perform different tasks and activities. So I hope this makes sense for you all. Let's stop over here. Let's take a quick break. Everyone, grab a cup of tea or coffee. Let's assemble back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, we went ahead and discussed about various aspects, starting from the licensing part, getting into the data cleansing, and Microsoft Copilot Studio, how it can help us create the resources, and what should be the considerations behind the same. So once you look at the resources over here, we need to have Microsoft Copilot UI UX, which is already available. So once we have published any of these bots, we can get the information from our underlying sources. To connect to these underlying sources, what you would require is respective connectors for third-party members and data sources, respective plugins, right? We can perform any kind of additional business logic or interact with data sources by using Copilot Studio actions, right? So once we have this declarative contents and data available within our environment with other resources and actions being mapped to it, then we can publish these agents to our respective channels, respective websites, Teams environment to make it available to our end users. So from an extensibility perspective, let's take a look at one more video for the same.
A lot of the information you work with today might sit outside of Microsoft 365 locations. So how can you safely bring that information into your Microsoft 365 Copilot experiences to ground generative AI results? There are two primary options. First, you can use Microsoft Graph Connectors to integrate the data sources you want with Semantic Index for Copilot. This option pre-indexes defined read-only information used for retrieval with your prompts to drive the most relevant AI-generated responses. The second option uses managed and trusted plugins, which can be a few different types, including OpenAI plugins, Microsoft Teams message extensions, and Power Platform connectors. And with plugins, instead of pre-indexing information, they optimize for real-time API-based data retrieval, and they can optionally even write back data. Both options follow Microsoft's comprehensive security, compliance, and privacy approach, while respecting the boundaries that you define within your organization's data services.
So I hope this makes a sense from perspective of that once it comes to your custom agents, when we are creating these extension points, these extension points are not only working with data within the environment, but also data which is outside the environment. So once we have our end goal in mind, what do we want to achieve? Then we can start working on the backend resources. And if you see the steps involved, step number one would be preparing our business for AI. And like we discussed earlier, checking for data stores, checking for security options on that, looking at how many number of seats that we are looking for, how many number of people we are targeting for Copilot licenses, and what should be the new work habits so that we have optimal usage of Copilot. So like I mentioned earlier, as an example, marketing team, sales teams, where there are new kind of idioms to be created, new proposals to be created on a day-to-day basis, correct? That's where Copilot would make more sense. Now again, that depends upon organization to organization and what kind of tasks that they are doing. As part of phase two, this is where we have the ongoing training to be done, how to use effective prompts based on the current data sources that we have. How do we write the prompt in a best possible way to get relevant results? We can identify people, identify champions to lead the way, people who are already tech savvy, people who have already been working on innovative aspects. So we can identify them. In terms of delivering the contents, here we can have Copilot dashboard. So what was the time being deployed on using these Copilot? What was the contents being created? What is the feedback from the customers? So that would be a great morale booster for seeing that yes, this was given to 10 people. This is how they have used it. This is the response or impact that we have got from the users. Now, once these 10 people have used, or whatever number you all might have chosen, once people see success of them, then it will help them to get more licenses. And by now, they would know how to put Copilot licenses to optimal use. As part of phase 4, like integrating with pre-existing organizational processes, which could be a customer management process, inquiry management process, uh, induction process, right? It could be internal or external processes, getting some information from our CRM sources or ERP environment, integrating those data components with our Copilot. That's where comes extendability and optimization. So from broad level perspective, you'll see these are 4 phases in which we can successfully implement our Copilot along with the extension. So before I proceed ahead, anyone, any questions still here? I don't see any questions on the chat. So if you all have any questions, you can put it on the chat. Let's go to the next module. So once it comes to your Copilot, one of the initial phases that we have is managing the data access. Because once it comes to your Copilot, it can search and provide information or integrate them with LLMs where the user has given permissions. Correct? So whenever it comes to your data access permissions, then we need to make sure that we have a personalized access, and any of the critical data which is being sensitive information, that has to be classified, that has to be marked and mapped in the backend. From perspective of security, privacy, data residency, this is something which I already mentioned. So as far as Copilot is concerned, Microsoft is committed to responsible AI. Any of the organization information is not being shared outside, or it is not being used to train the LLMs, the existing large language models which are there. As an organization using Azure OpenAI services, we can also go and create something called as SLMs, which is small language models targeted to our business, target to our environment. We can create those services, create those members over here. Well, once it comes to your sensitive information, once it comes to sensitive information, here, this is the cycle that one needs to use. So starting off with access control, right? What is the access given to specific users or groups? Second important aspect is data encryption. So even if there is some sensitive information which is visible and a customer wants to transfer that information to another mailbox or forward that details to another member, it should not be available. It should not be possible to print that data or take a screenshot of that, right? That's where encryption will play a vital role. Third important aspect is the compliance boundary. So when we're talking about Microsoft Purview, there we have a concept of something called as governance domains. There's a concept of data domains. So whenever you're talking about a compliance boundary, this will be the boundary outside which the data is not available. Along with this, like we were discussing about, we mentioned about information barriers. So each department will have its own information, and you want to create a restriction saying this data cannot go out of that departmental boundary. So some of these primary steps have to be done before we go ahead with making this data available for training the existing models. So here, when you say no training data is being used, this is what I mentioned earlier. So Microsoft says none of the enterprise information or customer information is used to train the models. Each of the each of these organizations or enterprises, they have isolated instances behind the scene. So there is no data sharing between two customers. And finally, usage of responsible AI principles, which Microsoft has been advocating from day one, that we are not going to misuse any information being shared or given within the environment. We can go into more details of tenant isolation, data isolation. It's slightly verbose in nature, so I don't want to go into more details over here. You all can find all these details within your learning path resource, which I have shared earlier. You all can go through that. So if you look at the regulatory compliance requirements, Microsoft checks for data privacy, data transparency, accountability, because starting from the simplest details, right? Any document or reports that we are creating to your code-based implementation, everything is available on internet, and all of them with trained using the Copilot, which will be taking it to the next level altogether, right? From making it available to the end users, partners, customers. So we'll have to be very, very careful with that. So this completes with our first module in terms of understanding the end-to-end perspective of Copilot. Let's go to the next module. So in case you all have any questions, doubts, queries, you all can put it on the chat. Let's go to the next section here, that is managing Microsoft 365 Copilot administration. Some part of the administration we mentioned earlier by using tools like Microsoft Entra, Microsoft Intune. Let's understand the principles of zero trust. How are we going to manage Microsoft 365 environment over here from a Copilot perspective? Once it comes to zero trust model, there are some of the core ground rules that we have over here. If you see the first rule, it says verify explicitly. So if you are a CIO, CTO, CXO, doesn't matter. You'll need to provide required credentials. If it is multi-factor authentication, that is even better, right? So once it comes to authentication, there cannot be any drop in terms of the levels when it comes to your verification. Second member over here is once the user has logged in, making sure we are giving a right authorization and not just enough authorization, but just in time. So just enough access and just in time. Tell me how much time is required for performing a required operation. We will give permissions only for that period of time, right? So both of these things have to be managed over here. The core purpose that one would want to achieve, or as an administrator we would want to achieve, is to eliminate oversharing. When it comes to your files, folders, teams, email, we should not be oversharing. I already mentioned about sensitivity labels, data loss prevention policies. So once we are creating these DLP policies, these DLP policies, data loss prevention policies, once it comes to your DLP policies, we'll have to make sure that these policies are being applied on data sources, your SharePoint libraries, OneDrive, if you see the policies over here, when we create a policy, we need to make sure the right data classifiers, sensitivity labels, exact data match, all those members are being mapped over here. Just give me a moment. So what we can do is once we create this policy, we can enable this policy immediately, or we can apply this policy based on an approval from the manager. I don't know what's going wrong. It's not showing the policy here. I already had the policies created. Which policy you want to map? Financial policy, custom policy. Within that, what regulations you want to map over here, right? What is the name that we want to mention for our DLP policy? If you want to map any administrative units over here, this is what I have been talking about in terms of data sources, Exchange email, SharePoint sites, OneDrive, devices, instances, on-premises repositories. We can add multiple members over here depending upon what is the scope that you want to cover. And it can be for specific users or it could be for all the users. So if you want to use the pre-existing members, credit card number, check for US bank account number, or if you want to add any additional DLP rules, we can do that as well, adding regular expressions to detect when this content is being shared from Microsoft 365 with people outside my organization. So this details is going outside, then it becomes even more alarming rather than rather than the information being shared within the organization. So what protection actions you'd want to do? Send an incident report, send any kind of alerts, restrict access or encrypt the content. So what is the actions that you want to perform over here? First, it comes to restriction. What is the restriction that we want to enforce over here? App access permissions. Use one of the automated actions from Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. And once this policy is ready, then what do you want to do? So do you want to run the policy, turn on the policy, right? And we can initiate the process right away. We can start the verification right away. Getting it? So this is called as least privilege access, having sensitivity labels and data loss prevention to avoid any such kind of problems. Last but not the least is assume breach. So the purpose of verifying is explicitly, purpose of specifying the privilege access is to assume that we are always under a threat attack. And why should one do that? Unless we do assume breach, we'll never be serious about what is the level of implementation or what is the level of focus which is being required over here, how critical it is. And this rule applies not just to administrators, but all the people who are part of the data creation, data access. So anybody sees any such issue being happening or any loose ends being available within the system, they should escalate that immediately and it has to be rectified. Now, how all these principles that we spoke about applies to our Copilot deployment. Just legal, let's understand that aspect. So once it comes to your training on Copilot or preparing the team within the organization or within a particular department for Copilot adoption. So once it comes to your Microsoft Copilot, here we have two options available. One is similar to your Bing search, right? So you have Copilot add-ons available there, which can help you perform a chat-based implementation. Second way of interacting would be using our work account. When we are going for this work account, where we have the integration with Teams, Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint, that's where we can go and generate some of the information. Now, while we are searching for our details within the mailboxes, searching for information within the um, recent documents being shared, recent emails being shared with other team members, right? So, what is the generative AI or what is the new type of content that we are initiating? So if you look at your zero trust principles, we can start with web grounded prompts to the internet. Web grounded in sense checking for external information, add security protection to your Edge browser summarization, check for information and see if there are any security related details or sensitive information being returned as part of your prompt results, right? And any of these things, any of such kind of data being leaked out or made available during our testing phases, it should be immediately updated to the security team. If you see the layers over here, Microsoft 365 graph grounded prompt, grounded in sense, these are mapped to the base entities or data within our environment. So whether you are accessing Microsoft 365 based information or we are accessing the public content. If you see these information sources in the background, how they will be available? They'll be available through your Copilot extensions on the Bing, Microsoft 365 Copilot, or it could be accessible through your security Copilot. Just give me a moment. Let me go to my environment over here. So here if you see, we have a Copilot option available. We look at the members, stand out on socials, going on holiday. This is more in terms of your base entities, their base search. We can have our web-based search over here. If we have any other agents being created, we can associate or map those agents. Just to see, you have series of pre-existing agents available. Now, along with these agents, we also need to have permissions or a license to map to these agents. So if you have any of our custom agents being published, we can utilize those agents as well. What is daily bot all about? Or if we have added any other third-party agents, we can leverage on those members as well. Okay. So if you look at the zero trust principles and how do we apply zero trust principle to each of the steps involved within the Copilot. So first is our protection on data level. And like I already mentioned the data sources earlier. Second important member is check your identity and access to each of these resource that we have. Now third member, so we have till discussed two of these members till now. What we have not discussed about is app protection. If we go back to the Entra environment, once it comes to your identities, users, groups, these are one set of members that we have. Apart from this, we have devices and applications. There are large number of pre-existing applications or applications that we may have registered over here, which will have permissions on underlying data. So here if you see this Bajaj admin agent, which I have created for my Copilot Studio, right? This has permissions on the data. And this has been registered as an application within the backend environment. Now, once it comes to your applications, we need to enforce app protection policies and same approach, having specifying least privileged access, which contents that agent can access and assume breach. Next important member that you'll see is deploy and validate device management protection. So whenever you are adding any third-party devices, what is the permissions that you want to check for? What is the state of that device you want to check for? Whether it is a managed device, unmanaged device, it is compliant, non-compliant, right? All these information has to be verified over here. If it is a legacy device, is it a device which is not authorized by the company? All these things we have to map over here. For device management protection, what we can also do is we can use Intune as a resource, intune.microsoft.com. Any of the device level policies that we would want to create and enforce within our enterprise, we can do that. And this will help us ensure endpoint security. So what are the devices being onboarded? And for each device, what is the policy that I want to enforce? Antivirus, disencryption, endpoint privilege management, checking for device compliance, reducing the attack surface, right? So all these things can be enforced by using our Intune as an environment. So once it comes to successful implementation of zero trust principles, there are a lot of options available. And by purchasing the right set of licenses and applying the right set of policies, we can prepare our environment from the Copilot perspective, right? So application protection, device management protection, deploy or validate your threat protection services. So once it comes to your threat protection is part of your Defender implementations. Defender for endpoint. What are the options available there? Checking for secured collaboration on your Teams environment, Teams channels. And like we mentioned about DLP policies, there we were referring to the application of DLP policies, application of DLP policies on Teams channels. Last but not the least, deploy or validate minimal user permissions, just-in-time access, using role-based access controls. Now, mapping these role-based access control policies, this can be done by using your Microsoft 365 admin center. So whenever we have large number of licenses, what permissions or what roles we want to assign to them, right? So if you go to any of these users, we have licenses and apps available. So for which license, Intune Suite, Copilot Studio, MOD Administrator, there are 73 applications over here. Which applications you want to specify permissions for a given user, right? Some of them are the older ones. We can have internal users, we can have external users being added over here, right? I already have Intune Suite, Power Apps, Power Automate Free. I have permissions on other licenses over here. Enter ID P1, Enter ID P2, Intune Plan 1. I also have permissions for Purview environment. So once we have these permissions being mapped, it becomes easier for us to give them relevant permissions. What are the so once I have the Copilot license being added, what are the features which I want to configure here? Image generation, Copilot in Edge, Teams meeting. So where do you want the Copilot members to be available? So those configuration we can perform there. So from perspective of data protection, I have already mentioned about the purview information protection. Within the purview environment, we have auditing, communication, compliance, e-discovery. We have options for data retention. Now this will be an important aspect to understand. Once it comes to your data being collated or data being stored at one place, till how much time you want to retain that information? 5 years, 10 years, 1 year. Now, some of these data retention will be part of the compliance strategy or the audit policies for a given vertical. So whether you are in medical industry or you are in a specific industry segment, based on that, as per the compliance policy, one should retain that information for that particular point in time. How do you want to classify information, classify details, right? So we need to check for that. Now, once it comes to your customer key, customer keys from perspective of data encryption. When it comes to data encryption for Microsoft, there are two approaches for it. So one approach is we do the data encryption using the key provided by Microsoft, right? That's one option. Second option over here is using the custom key, which is part of our environment. So generally, when we have data within our on-premises environment, we have data within cloud environment, it is preferable to use a single key, right? And it is essential that we store that key into a right location, which is Microsoft Azure Key Vault, right? So there we can store that encryption details and use the same key across both the environments. So it becomes easier for us to improvise the speed of data transfer and data communication, because otherwise what will happen is there will be multiple places where the data encryption and decryption will take place. In terms of identity and access management, I have already discussed about it. In terms of hybrid identities, synchronizing identities from our on-premises Active Directory to the Entra ID environment, multi-factor authentication, right? We can analyze the signals. So this is actually part of your conditional access policy. If we go to our Entra environment, if we go to the Entra environment, within Entra environment, here we can check for conditional access policy. We can create a new policy here. And here we can see the respective conditions being mapped. So based on these conditions, whether the user risk is high, medium, low, sign-in risk is high, medium, or low, what is the kind of device being used by the user, where is the user logging from, right? Which is the client application the user wants to connect to or access after logging in. What is the filter for devices that we want to map over here? Everything is being mentioned as a condition. So after going through all these conditions, if all the conditions are true, then what action you would want to perform? And if any of these conditions is false, then what is the action you'd want to perform? Right? So those kind of decisions can be taken. Whether you want to grant access, you want to grant access with multi-factor authentication, password strength, right? So we can enforce some of these Another set of conditions, even when you're doing the grant. So it's not straight away saying, yes, I granted, block or allow, right? There could be multiple other uh, options. So after you provide me these details, then I will allow you. Say how you are doing for user ID and password, right? So we specify right credentials, but still it says, now give me a multi-factor authentication details. If you have received an OTP, you have received a email message, or you have an authenticator app being configured. So there should be minimum of two things add on after this user ID and password. Then I will allow you. Association of biometric. Now that is what is called as assuming breach. That is what is called as verify explicitly. And that is how one can implement zero trust environment. So in terms of app protection policy, I already mentioned about Intune, right? So as far as these application protection policies are concerned, these can be enforced on all the devices within the environment. Now, again, how this app protection policy would associate or map with Copilot. So what is this Copilot all about? So Copilot actually is an application which is trying to access the organizational data, which is trying to fetch data from outside through LLMs and make it available to the registered user. Correct? So what permissions should be assigned to this Copilot application? Whether it should have restricted permissions, whether it should have all the permissions, right? So all those things have to be mapped through a application protection policy. Just give me a moment. Let me go to the application sections, app registration. Let me go to the agent over here. So what is the authentication being mapped? What is the API permissions that you would want to give? Can you see this? So what permissions we want to give to this admin agent on our underlying environment? Azure services, legacy applications, your on-premises environment, Office 365 management APIs. So based on the permissions being given, this agent, Bajaj admin agent or whatever name we might have given, it will be allowed to access that data sources in the backend. So in terms of device management policy, I have already shown conditional access. So if you look at the data protection phases, first step would be checking for your data sources, creating auto labeling rules, DLP policies, checking for sensitive schema, right? So all this will be part of your data governance section. As far as data sources are concerned, SharePoint sites, your Microsoft 365 productivity apps, are endpoint devices. Then you have defend against threat. Guys, just give me 2 minutes. I'll be back. So till now we have been discussing about Intune. We have been discussing about policies over here, right? We have been discussing about Microsoft Purview. There is one more critical resource that one should be aware about, which is part of the security ecosystem over here. That is called as security.microsoft.com. And this security.microsoft.com has another name called as Defender Portal. This is our Defender Portal. So once it comes to Defender Portal, It can integrate smoothly with our Azure Sentinel, Microsoft Azure Sentinel. And here, if you see the message, connect to a workspace, it is referring to the Sentinel environment. So in case Copilot is trying to access some unwanted information, right? Because it's an application and the way how it is being written, if there is any third party attacker who's trying to access the information, right? So all these things can be raised as a security incident. It can be managed by the underlying environment, and we can raise an alert message over here. This was the incident. This was the issue which I want to notify to the entire team. I want to perform hunting over here. And if you see the environment, there are a lot of pre-existing queries that we have. There are a lot of pre-existing functions that we have. So this attack has been initiated from which environment? What is the queries over here? Community queries, checking for campaigns, checking for cloud applications, checking for collection of anomalies or data that you have, exfiltration, right? So you have options for Defender for cloud, Defender for devices, and this Defender will help us to map and reduce the attacks which are happening on the underlying environment. So whether these attacks are happening on devices, identities, or the cloud environment. So if an attack has already happened, how do we block any such future attacks? Right? So those things we can do over here. So you say defend against threats. So defender for identity, defender for Office 365, endpoint, applications, all these things will be used as a common, as a core security guard mechanism over here. So once this is done, we can use Microsoft. So you can see there are three things which is being used. The topmost member is governance using Microsoft Purview, defend against threat, which is using Defender XDR, and the below section that you see, deploy Intune configuration, configure enterprise recommended, configure compliance policies. All this is part of your zero trust foundation using Intune portal. So three portals being used, or three bunch of services being used from security perspective. One more which I should not forget, that is your Entra ID P2. So four members involved over here to help us protect the complete environment and enforce zero trust security. Okay. So Entra ID protection, Defender for Office 365. This is all part of your Defender XDR solutions. From data sources, Microsoft SharePoint, Microsoft Teams. I already mentioned about Microsoft Purview, and not to forget SharePoint Advanced Management. So site access restrictions, conditional access policy for slides as well. Once it comes to your Teams environment, we can specify how do you want to allow access to the data. So like other admin centers, we have admin center for Teams as well. Just give me a moment. Let's go to the admin center. Now within admin center, you have admin centers for compliance, which is purview.microsoft.com, admin center for exchange, entra.microsoft.com. You have Intune administration, Power Apps, Power Automate. We have SharePoint Admin Center. I'm not sure earlier it was not working. Oh, mistake. I was writing SharePoint-admin.com. It is the domain name -admin.sharepoint.com. So every Teams channel which is created, each Teams channel will have an active site available here. We have Teams Admin Center, any kind of compliance policies, sensitivity policies that one would want to enforce. That should be part of your Teams implementation, right? So what Teams policies you want to update over here? Discover private teams, create private channels, share channels. So you want to add a group policy. So we have appropriate policies over here. The one that we were talking about, Teams devices, phones, SIP devices, Teams room on Windows. What permissions we want, what applications we want to map over here. Now these things can be created inside the Teams environment. So once it comes to your data policies, once it comes to your mapping of resources, we can perform that on Exchange environment, SharePoint environment, Teams environment, your Entra ID. Now, one should have a question saying, as far as Teams, SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, why are these four in consistent scrutiny? When we say security, why are we always focusing on these 3 to 4 members? The reason being, these 3 to 4 members that we have, they are the ones, they are the applications where the data is being shared outside the organization, right? And not just these, any other mechanism like your Copilot also is one of the sources where somebody can go and connect to the Copilot and find information or get details from your underlying environment. So all these places or all these ways and means of allowing the data accessibility outside the organization, there has to be barriers over here. There has to be restrictive gates over here to stop any of these communication, any of the sensitive information to go outside the environment or the organization premises. We already discussed about these models. Let's take one more quick break before we go to the management of Microsoft Copilot and going into details of extension endpoints, extensibility options. Meanwhile, if you all have any questions, doubts, queries, you all can put it on the chat. Everyone, grab a cup of tea or coffee. Welcome back, everyone. Let's go to the last set of modules for the session and let's understand the details from perspective of managing Microsoft Copilot and the extensibility options that we have available here. So once it comes to Microsoft Copilot and Microsoft 365 Copilot, the primary difference which happens behind the scene is Microsoft Copilot is connecting to our Bing sites, it is connecting to other searchable sources available on web. But it does not have any direct impact from our organizational perspective or organizational data, which means it does not use the data that we have locally available. Whereas if you look at Microsoft 365 Copilot, it leverages on Microsoft Copilot functionality, the LLMs that we have, the pre-existing large language models that we have, and how does that correlate with our current organizational details. Say, for example, as a learning consultant, I want to deliver a session on Microsoft 365 Copilot. Right? That's simple and straightforward. It can help me with a information. I can collate that information into a presentation or a document, and I can go ahead. Right? That would be your standard Microsoft Copilot. If I want to generate a session, I want to deliver a session on Microsoft 365 Copilot, and this session has to be for one of my customers, say HCL or L&T or Capgemini. Within that, I want to do this session for a specific department. I want to do it for a HR team, right? I have my HR team, which has these kind of conversations or these kind of issues which they have raised in the past. I want to use that information. I want to generate this presentation, create a specific set of slides, use the branding of Capgemini, use the problems which I have encountered earlier, add those solutions and use case scenarios within my presentation. Right? Now, in this case, what I'm doing is I'm using the information from my local HR team. I'm using the feedback which is given by my other team members on the Teams chat. I want to incorporate all those things within my existing information. And like I said, I also want to generate the presentation by using my Copilot for PowerPoint. So all these things are mapped into a single solution. So when you're talking about Microsoft 365 Copilot, it is focusing on a complete end-to-end solution in terms of document generation, enhancing collaboration, talking to other team members, right? Getting the integration of data within my environment, within other Microsoft 365 resources. So if I want to add loop component, if I want to add some uh, existing resources from Microsoft Sway, right? If I want to go to my CRM environment, I want to add some of the feedback of my existing customers for the current implementation. I can pull that data as well. That is what is Microsoft 365 Copilot. So from usage point of view, it could be web grounded prompts, what kind of information that you are looking for, or it could be graph grounded prompts. If you see the difference over here, what is your major source of data? Is it only the internet-based data, internet-based information, or it is information available within your organization, information available within your SharePoint libraries, OneDrive, your Exchange mailboxes that you have, your CRM solutions that you have, right? Your Power Platform Dataverse members that we have. So I want to collate all that internal information. Now, one study or I would say one observation which I have come across in due course of time, we have collated so much of information which is locally available, but we seldom make sense out of that. So every time we get a requirement, we start running outside, getting information from outside. But internally, there is a lot of information that we never go back and go back to it and study that. Now, one example you all must have seen most, and this is I would say human behavior as well. When it comes to looking or searching for information, all the PDFs that we may have saved within our OneDrive or PDFs that we may have saved within our local machine, we don't go to them. Instead, we again do a Bing search, we again do a Google search to find the new information. Searching within our local machine, that's the last thing that we do, right? So once we look at your graph grounded prompts, and in today's context, what customer is looking for is, see, even they have the same web-based information, right? Even they can web search. So Google or Bing, this is not something which is local to our environment. And it may not bring out the specialty of organization or a IP of an organization. So for an organization, whatever they have done, whatever their experiences or feedback which is being there, that is something which will differentiate it. So your graph grounded prompts, this will help you to bring out those nuances. We can use a specific language from Copilot, that's not a problem, right? But that is something which will differentiate us from the external world. So that's why this is one of the most important members which I would recommend. Now, the challenge which happens is people are scared that when I'm sharing this information, I should not be sharing names, addresses, the price points that we had offered for those customers, right? I don't want to share that information, which makes sense as well. So in that scenarios, we'll have to classify those information, protect those information, but some things like feedback or whatever has been the experience of those customers, that information should go out. So along with your compliance resources, what should be focused on is enterprise data protection, your EDP implementation, data encryption, the chat data being sent from the Copilot, right, is encrypted in transit and at rest, right? Any kind of advertising from Microsoft that actually doesn't happen, right? So if we want to add any external information or information about our organization, those things we can add, but Microsoft does not add any third party information or any, or to say, top two sites or three sites over here. So those kind of things are avoided. We already looked at this diagram earlier. Let's take a look at one more video before we proceed ahead.
You may be thinking that bringing AI to your organization safely is expensive. I want to let you in on a little secret. That's not true. With Microsoft Copilot, you can bring AI to your organization today. It's a chat that comes with commercial data protection built in to safeguard your data. And the best part? More than likely, you're already eligible for it at no additional cost. Hi, I'm Amelia, a product manager for Microsoft Copilot. In this session, I'll cover how you can give your employees AI-powered chat today as a simple first step in transforming your organization into an AI-led productivity powerhouse. First, we'll cover what commercial data protection means in Copilot and why Copilot is a great place to get started with AI-powered chat. Then, we'll go through a quick demo to see Copilot in action.
So guys, if you look at any of these implementations, when you talk about Copilot, right? And like I said, it is either web grounded, or we'll be looking at some of the resources over here from perspective of graph grounded, connecting to our local data. In each of these scenarios, in each of these implementations that we have, we can ensure Microsoft ensures encryption of the data and not losing out any critical or sensitive information from our on-premises environment or from our device boundary to the external world. Now, once it comes to these Copilot resources, this concepts that we discussed about, so we have work and web options. So work, as we see over here, is your graph grounded, whereas the web resource that you see over here, this is mapping to the internet-based searches. Once it comes to your Copilot implementation, depending upon the type of license that we have, here we can see the Copilot agent consumption meter, diagnostic logs, how much of Copilot has been used earlier on Edge, Teams. Now, once it comes to these information, this will help us to understand the current consumption of Copilot within our environment. So in my case, I have a free plan right now, which I'm using. That's why you may not be able to see all the required options. So allow image generation. Right? So we can see relevant reports over here. If you have not enabled some of the options, we can check for the configuration profiles, which sites you want to add over here. What is the extension areas, site lists, what is the configuration profile that you want to create. These are specific entities from perspective of Copilot implementation. From our Teams administration, how do you want to associate Copilot over here? From perspective of transcription, recordings, right? So these are specific settings that one can do to make sure we are having best kind of implementation of your Microsoft 365 Copilot. We already mentioned about web grounding, graph-based grounding. We already discussed about Microsoft Purview. This is more in terms of details of each of these members, how to enable data classification, auditing. Just give me a moment. Let me go back to the Purview environment. Within the Purview environment, one of the initial solutions that you have is audits. Once we have enabled this audit, there's actually since in my case I have already done it, there's a button that you see over here that is start auditing. So if you have any information being saved earlier, any information which is being saved earlier, we'll be able to get these details. Right now, this is queued. right? We can search for any specific activity that is being performed in that duration. So once these, now the reason why I will be able to see this information, because I have enabled auditing earlier. Second thing that one needs to do is store this information by using something called as data lifecycle management. What is the retention that we want for our resources? Till how much time we would want to save this data? 5 years, 10 years. So it could be from a long-term perspective as well. Where do we want to allow these labels to appear? As an individual who's saving this data, they can go and select this option. They can go and select this labels. So publish this label to Microsoft 365 locations, Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, or if you want to auto apply this label. So depending upon a certain piece of text being mapped or certain content type being mapped, I want to apply this label automatically. Say for example, I have certain documents which is referred as HR policy. So HR policy for induction, HR policy for reimbursement, HR. So wherever I find HR policy in the file name, I would want to apply this label over there, right? So these are some of the key members where we can leverage on Microsoft Purview. Look at the Copilot dashboard. Once we have activated the resources, once we have purchased multiple licenses for Copilot, we can see the details for it within our organization. Right? So you can see the readiness. Now this information in terms of these implementations, we can see these details on your partner portal, or if you have any ESPs, the service providers, there you can see these informations. What is the number of Copilot licenses being used? How many licenses are there? How many of the users have been assigned these licenses? Right? So from the Viva Insights, we can see all these details. I doubt if I have a Viva license. Let me just check for it. Here we should also have details for Copilot. This is the right one. So in terms of adoption site, adoption.microsoft.com, whatever details one would want to check for from the perspective of steps which is being involved. Right? You can see the SMB success kit for business leaders for implementation of AI. So once we have these resources being mapped, once we have our respective portals being connected over here, like I mentioned earlier, we should be able to check for what is the how are the licenses being utilized internally, what is their effectiveness for it, and the core purpose of having selective people being assigned for this program or being associated these licenses. So if those people are not using the licenses up to the mark, then it can be transferred to other users as well. Right? That's how we can use the environment optimally. Now one would say, Om Prakash, why would people not want to use it? So it's not about they want or not. At times, what happens is I'm under tremendous pressure, number of client deliveries to be done, number of new EDMs to be created. That's when I would want to leverage on it. Now, once that season is gone, we are already that marketing aspects or sales proposals have been done. Now these things are in delivery, correct? So while it is in delivery, I may not, since there are multiple deliveries happening parallelly, I may not have too much of a pressure in that timelines. So for that 1, 2, or 3 months, whatever is that timeline, it can be allocated to somebody else who has similar kind of requirements. So we can move these licenses from one users to other users as well. Another important aspect that we have been talking about from perspective of Microsoft Purview is creation of company compliance communication compliance policies, and some of the members that will be reused over here would be your SITs, sensitive information types, set of keywords which are being used, trainable classifiers, any specific conditions that you want to match over here. So those things can be made a part of your communication compliance. Let's go to the Purview portal once again. And here, if you look at your solutions, so just below audit, you have communication compliance. Here we can specify policies that we would want. So what is the policy that you want to map over here? Open the policy to view the potentially risky content. So if you see the policies over here, the first policy itself is detect Microsoft Copilot interactions, check for inappropriate content, text, images, detect sensitive information types, SITs, which I was talking about, detect financial regulatory compliance, or if you want to build a custom compliance yourself, we can do that. For now, since our focus is Copilot, Microsoft Copilot like Copilot interactions, so who will be the reviewers over here? I want to be the reviewer for this. Okay, now please be careful over here. What is the kind of information that you want to select? So, and here you have something called as trainable classifiers. So adult images, corporate sabotage, gifts and entertainment, any kind of profanity being used, any kind of sexual content or targeted harassment which is there, unauthorized disclosure, Apart from that, if you were to check for any other type of content, now these are, now one would say, what is the information behind it, or what is the way of treating that as a sexual content or a threat content? How do I know that? Now, guys, these are trainable classifiers already being mapped by Microsoft behind the scene, and they have the relevant trained models for it. So these are the kind of words being used, which means this fits into the given category. So what we can do is we can create multiple such policies in terms of communication policies between the, within the organization, outside the organization, right? We can map these members over here. Right? So if you see, these are set of pre-existing connectors. So when an individual is using a Slack environment, Skype for business, using Teams environment, Teams is by default being mapped. Any other external member, third-party members that we want to associate, we can map this policies over there. So I can have number of pre-existing policies. We can create our own open workshop trainable classifier. We can have our own classifier as well, on which sites you want to apply it, or from which sites we can get the positive sample for it. Okay. So once we have mapped this, we can have our trainable classifier being created. Now at times this can become an issue, because whenever we are creating such kind of models, right, such kind of documents to train a model that this is a negative content or this is a racy content that you have, this kind of content should not appear. And when we are doing the scan of the entire library, those contents may appear. So what should be done is that kind of information should be excluded when you are doing the uh, verification, because that information was only used to train the model. So once the training is done, we can exclude that from normal scanning. Same way, we can mention sensitive information type. If there are any fingerprint based SITs, any document which has a watermark in the background, right? That would be sensitive information. Or if there is something written as confidential as watermark, so we can use our fingerprint based SITs. So these are set of your communication compliance policies when we are having a conversation or having a discussion, sharing of loading for content or looking for information using copilots. I already discussed about the XDR, but this is a good diagram, end-to-end flow for understanding the information. So once we have our communications happening from the end user, right, it should be left to right, but in this diagram, it should be right to left. So first thing to communicate over here would be Defender for cloud application. So once the user tries to log in, they will first connect to the identity, authenticate themselves, authorize themselves, and they will be using the cloud application for accessing it, right? Now that cloud application which they are referring, they will be using a particular device for it, which is a mobile phone, tablet, or desktop environment, server environment, right? That would be Defender for endpoint. Now, this cloud application we're talking about may be a third-party application using RESTful APIs. It is connecting to your Office 365 environment, or it could be your Office 365 application itself. Okay? If you see the diagram, this is Outlook installed on our desktop machine, and this is the Exchange Online environment that we are trying to access through it. So once it comes to your Microsoft Defender XDR, it has to check for all the members, right? Checking for Defender for cloud application, Defender for endpoint, that is on a device, Defender for Office 365, and Defender for identity. So all these values, all these members have to be verified over here. Anyone? Any questions still here? So you'll realize maximum amount of focus is on the security solutions that we have, especially the special focus over here is in terms of Microsoft Purview, because this will help us in terms of data retention, checking for data communication compliance, data catalog, checking for data quality, right? So if you see the health management, here we have data quality, what actions you would want to perform, creation of governance domains. So it is giving me an error because with this current identity, I don't have permissions on the Azure portal. This current identity which I have, this is only having access to the Microsoft 365 environment. As part of the governance portal, this requires to have access on Azure as well. So if you want to leverage on both these, if you want to access the complete portal, all the features of the Purview portal, the identity that you are using should have Azure subscription, and it should also have Microsoft 365 license being associated with it, right? So that would be the right approach. So once we have the appropriate licenses being mapped, we have consistently being tracking who are the users being assigned, how are they using the Copilot license, right? We have also ensured that the data which is being shared, all the protection implementation is being done. So all the sensitive information we have associated using a trainable classifier, using sensitive information types, exact data match, right? All this labeling is being done, communication compliance is being done. For any external users who are trying to access, we already have safeguarded our environment by using the Entra ID, what permissions the guest users should have, what permissions internal users should have. That segregation is already being done, right? So now I am confident that after all these prerequisite steps have been taken care, the security measures based on zero trust implementation is enforced. Now I can be sure, and I can start working with creating a custom agents. I can start extending the agents which I have, AI driven agents for third party information, third party resources. Let's go to the third module. So once it comes to your earlier discussion, we discussed about web grounded resources and graph grounded resources. So here, this is what I was mentioning earlier, adding a knowledge with graph connectors, adding skills with using appropriate plugins, and having these members in place, I can build my own Copilot. I may not have sufficient time to complete all these details over here. What I would recommend you all to do is, just give me a moment. So here what you all can do is, you can also look at documentation on Microsoft 365 Copilot. Where we'll see now what we are talking about is the last aspect here, extending and optimizing. But before that, there are a lot of other things that we have already discussed: Copilot scenario library, best practice and tools for employee engagement. So most of this information we already have discussed earlier. As starting off the session, some of you all were looking for Copilot Studio details. So this will be the right link for it. I have put it on the chat. Let me proceed ahead. So once it comes to your resources over here, so we have components of getting the right business value by using Copilot and using the agents. So there has to be a clear distinction between when we say Copilot, what does it mean? Copilot is more in terms of UI, UX that we have, which is working as a personal assistant, helping us to scan through all the locally available data that we have, and also helping us to get the information in a right manner. So whether you want it as a documentation or a drafting of an email or creating additional members, all these things is part of your Copilot. As far as so how is it different from an agent? So along with this UI UX, in the background, what works is the agent. So these agents basically are expert systems which are getting LLM based details, large language models, working with our local content, fusing both of them together so that we have a content generated which is organization specific, which is user specific. It works on behalf of a process or a company. So like I gave an example, I have hired a new person on uh, on training for AI 102, right? AI 102 certification. Now for that induction process, what is the material available in my on-premises environment? I want somebody to scan all that material from my learning repository. And once that scanning is being done, it should verify if there is any kind of old content which is no more relevant, delete that information, upload all this latest information onto a OneDrive and share a OneDrive non-downloadable link to the person who has joined in. Now, this entire process which I'm talking about, if it is done by a human being, it will take around a week's time. I don't have that much time. I want to complete this entire process in 1 hour or max 2 hours, right? So once I have identified those relevant libraries and I give it to the agent, create a Power Automate flow for this, it will help me to perform the task. Along with this, I also want to create a timeline that by this time, these should be the modules that should be completed. These are the online links available for preparing for AI 102. Correct? From the Microsoft documentation, these are the respective links for that. So this complete process we can create by using a agent. Now, how does that Excel document get created? How does that Word document or PPTs get created? That is where your Copilot would make sense. So fusion of both these members, Copilots and agents, this will help us to get the entire process working for our organization. If you look at your Copilots, agents make the Copilot more capable. Otherwise, if you don't associate an agent or if you don't associate a business process behind the scene, Copilot is just a replacement for Google search or Bing search, which may not bring out the actual value that is supposed to do, right? So the best part of it, like I said, it should be able to pull the data from our current environment, work on these, and help us perform the business process. Just give me a moment. Yeah, here it is. What Microsoft has done is they have also specified for each department, how we can leverage the Copilot benefits. HR team, no, I think this is the one. Scenario library. Yeah. So here, if you see, this is a very, very important section. And I want all of you all to explore this. Yes, Rohit, we can do that. We can add custom agents to see Copilot for sales is already a pre-existing member. So if you want to create your own custom agent, you can do that. Where you are specifying your own CRM resources. Any of the agents which are pre-existing, you can't modify that agent, which is given by Microsoft. But what we can do is we can build our own agents. We can build our own custom agent and we can specify the relevant data sources for it. Right? So here, if you all see this, Microsoft has already mentioned for communications, customer service, finance department, legal department, what will be the use cases here. Even in case of industry point of view, government sector, manufacturing sector, how one can leverage on Copilot. So first step would be, before we do the extensions, first step would be understanding what is the functional areas. And just an example which was being mentioned from sales perspective. If we want to create a personalized offer, what is the KPIs being impacted, what is the value benefit for it, and what should be the steps to be performed. Can you see this? Analyze customer goals, draft personalized offers, optimize deal terms, and then finalize the offer. Step number 6, close the deal. Right? So all these step-by-step activities and how we can leverage on the existing environment, those things can be seen over here. and they have given you a complete gallery over here. So once it comes to your Copilot extensibility, first understand what do you want to achieve, what is available within your current environment, and then look at the extensibility options. As far as the components are concerned, we have already discussed about the components. If you look at the scenario over here, you have IT help desk, project tracker, device refresh agent, customer support agent. The best place to see these details would be copilotstudio.microsoft.com. If you all have access to it, you all can go ahead and try this out. For now, what I'll do is I'll create a new agent over here. Again, it may not be a quick fix in saying the moment you create the agent, it should have everything. It's not magic. Like I said earlier, it has a AI model behind the scene. We have to train this resource by adding appropriate documentation details, PDF information. We have to train these models. Let me go ahead, create a agent over here. Say Synergetics learning agent. If I want to add an icon over here, I can do that. I may not be the best person for it. I may have to check with my security team, check with my design team to get the information, get the icon for the right size, less than 30 KB. What is the knowledge source I would want to add over here? So it could be public websites, SharePoint, Dataverse as a solution. Let me add the data sources over here. I want to add two members over here. One is Synergetics Learning, second is Synergetics Consulting. We add one more resource. So you can add as many number of knowledge sources as you would want. If there are any other knowledge sources, if you feel you have not added, don't worry, we can add it later as well. if I already have a CRM resource being mapped or CRM resource being built over here, so once I receive an inquiry, I would want to initiate that pre-existing process. As of now, I have not added any additional skills over here. Right? There are different options that we can map over here from the settings section. Right? So if you want to check for any specific courses or any specific details here, can you see this? So you can explore MS-4007, MS-4005 course. So what are the topics being used behind the scene? Now this is a Copilot implementation which is being used behind the scene. If you think this is not up to the mark, you want to change this, we can make required changes to the generated contents. So if you want to check for any other information, say I want to check for AI 102. So based on the underlying sources being given, and it's checking for all the information from Synergic's site. And if you see this discounted cost on AI certification 7,500. This is not coming from Microsoft Docs. This is coming from Synergetics. This is the way how you can add customizations or add specific members that you would want within your environment. Okay. So once you have your agent being created, if you see this, agents are your assistants. So you'll have to, like how you hire somebody, right? Say if you're a manager, right? If you are hiring a person, you'll have to train that person. Now, as part of the training, what would be involved? Sharing your organizational details, sharing the organizational objectives, mission, vision, right? All those aspects. Sharing the right knowledge sources, correct? Now, as a human being, that person will be able to interpret it in a different way, right? Once it comes to your chat GPT or once it comes to your models over here, it would understand what you're trying to say. If you want to provide more clarity, we'll have to invest some time in providing the right information. Now, if you see all the previous steps that we have done, checking for data quality, checking for sensitivity. All these things is the background work that one has to do so that the agent is aware, the Copilot is aware saying this is to be shared outside and this is not to be shared outside. Like how we train our kids, right? Don't take any eatables from somebody who's an outsider. Same way, we have to train this agent saying this information is sensitive. You cannot give it to anybody who's an outsider. Don't communicate these things to anybody who's an outsider. These are family secrets. Same way, we'll have to train our model over here to help it understand what is the kind of implementation that we are looking for. So if you look at your declarative agents, here within one Copilot, there could be many agents which are there, where you can have declarative instructions, adding of skills, ingestion of knowledge. So this is what I showed you all right now. Take this much time. Maybe it's taking time to uh, load from Microsoft Learn because that's a very heavy source. That because Synergetics, I don't have that much of material as compared to what Microsoft Learn would have. So I think I have done a mistake there. Let me remove this data source. Because anyway, the LLM that I have, that LLM will help me to get that information. So here if you see, we can upload text-based files, images, audio, video. I can upload text-based files over here, PDF files, not images, audio, video, but those things I can do over here. Just give me 1 second. I am not sure if I have that information with me. No, I don't have. So if I have a some sorry. So if I have a course catalog or if I have certain information available as a FAQ or PDF files, we can upload that document over here. Just give me a moment. No, I don't think I have the. Sorry guys, I don't have a specific PDF file, what I wanted to show is if you have any uh, relevant quality information where we have name of the course IDs, name of the course, the duration for the course, and the top level agenda, right? Now that information becomes easier for end users. So you can have a specific question over here. What is the condition being checked? What are the options available here? So if you see the mechanism of modifying this resource, modifying the data over here, so we can send a message, ask a question. If there are any variables that you want to match over here, right? If there's a topic management, transfer this conversation to another person, or you want to end this conversation here. If you see the actions over here, so we can launch Power Automate. We can create or initiate another prompt over here. So that if you look at conversations or communication between two agents, right? So we can transfer this agent from one action to another prompt. So we'll invoke next prompt over here. So what is the phrases that you want to check for? Say one of the phrases which I want to check for over here would be career building, right? This is what I want to add. Another thing which I want to check for is uh, corporate training, corporate trainer, right? That is what I'm looking for. Full-time learning consultant. So these would be set of topics which I want to add over here. So if anybody searches for these kind of information, then what should be the question that you'd want to ask? Right? So this is how one can go and build resources over here. So what is your current role in the organization? What type of question is it? If you want to give some of the options to the users, it might take good amount of time to create the resource. add relevant members over here. We can add multiple synonyms for this. So I'm a lab instructor right now. Right? So whatever options or values that you want to map, we can specify them over here. So once the question is being asked, once the value is being mentioned, so academic trainer, lab instructor, what is the next step that you want to showcase? What is the path for it? Or the third option over here could be, say, I'm a L1 support engineer, right? So for each of these members, what is the learning path that you'd want to mention over here? Say for academic trainer, that person has to first go through fundamentals, right? I can show a message over here. Right? Whatever message or whatever action one would want to perform in case of lab instructor, build implementation skills. Right? So whatever are the relevant certifications for each of the members. We can make relevant customizations with the pre-existing environment. Let's see, this topic is working for us. So what is your current role? Academic trainer, lab instructor, support engineer. Right? So will provide us the required details over here. So this is a quick example of how one can build resources over here. So once this answer is being given, so what do you want to do next? You want to use generative answers for it. So if anything is beyond these conditions and I have not taken that options. So here what I can do is I can say, sorry, whatever this user is asking, I don't know about it. So use generative answers. any value for X variable which is not part of my current environment. For that, can you go back to this link, that is credentials, and search information from here, right? So I may be, Synergetics as an organization may be giving solutions for say 5 members, 10 members, 30 members, but if it goes beyond that, then what do I do? Then go to other conditions. What is your current role? Lab instructor, support engineer. I'm an architect. So here we have not checked for other options. If you want other options over here, so you can map the resource. So is there anything apart from these values? Then what is the next step? Okay, everyone. Once we have made our changes, save this. Here what we can do is we can publish this agent and we can publish these agents on specific channels. What is the error here? Variable has been set to incorrect type. I've added a knowledge source earlier. It's not an issue. Fine. So here you have an option of channels. So we can go to the channel over here, wherever we want to publish it. So these are the options for publishing: Microsoft Teams, website, Zendesk, ServiceNow. And once it is available as a RESTful resource, RESTful URL, we can publish anywhere that you want. That's not a problem. So guys, we'll stop with this. Anyone, any questions? Thank you very much, everyone. Over to you, Saili. Thanks, Nilesh.